Hello, everybody. My name is Mary Lou Jackson, and I'm Vice President for Mission Integration. Judy Heumann is a remarkable and credible woman. We are thrilled and proud to feature her today as a woman who has been a change agent for disability rights and freedoms. Founders Day 2022 is a day of service, a day of honoring our founders, the Sisters of St. Joseph of Boston, whose legacy and values inspire this community every single day. Today, over 800 graduates, undergraduates, faculty, and staff, our online community, took to the streets, as the sisters have done in the past. Go Pride, as it truly was a day of community pride. Imagine the impact and difference we have made by the work we have done and for the people for whom we've served. We have pre-recorded an interview with the amazing Judy Heumann, and we're going to show that interview right now, followed by a live panel discussion with members of our Regis community.
Hello, my name is Courtney Mulligan, and I am the Director of Student Accessibility here at Regis College. I want to welcome you to Founders Day. Each year, the Regis community honors our founders, the Sisters of St. Joseph of Boston, with a day of service. Service to the dear neighbor without distinction is one of the core values of the Sisters and integral to the mission of our university community. Post-service, we engage in meaningful dialogue to connect the service experiences with our core values of social justice and equality. This culminates with a keynote address on the importance of service and advocacy, hallmarks of a Regis education. I am thrilled to introduce today's keynote speaker, Judy Heumann, a lifelong advocate for the rights of people with disabilities. Judy has been instrumental in the passage of legislation that provides equal opportunities for those with disabilities, such as Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Her memoir, Being Human, an unrepentant memoir of a disability rights activist, co-authored by Kristen Joyner, was published in 2020. She is also featured in the Oscar-nominated documentary Crip Camp, A Disability Revolution. Judy also produces a podcast called The Human Perspective, which features a variety of members from the disability community. Judy serves on a number of nonprofit boards, including the American Association of People with Disabilities, the Disability Rights Education Defense Fund, Humanity and Inclusion, Human Rights Watch, United States International Council on Disability, and Save the Children. She has 20 years of nonprofit experience working with various disability organizations, including being a founding member of the Berkeley Center for Independent Living. She served in both the Clinton and Obama administrations. It is my absolute honor to welcome Judy Heumann. Most of our students, and certainly many of our community members, were born after the passage of the ADA. Several do not know of the life and the challenges faced by people with disabilities in a pre-ADA era. Could you share some of the challenges you faced as a young person with a disability trying to navigate the educational landscape to achieve your goals?
Thank you so much for inviting me. Let me give a description of myself. So I'm a white 74-year-old disabled woman. We're in the foyer of my husband's in my apartment. I have brown hair with highlights, and I'm wearing a white blouse and a Jewish star necklace. And the foyer has all kinds of family photos and postcards. So Courtney, let me say that I will explain what things were like previously, but I also want to say that unfortunately, we are not yet where we need to be. So what I believe is important is discussing where we were, where we're hoping to be, and where we are not yet. So I don't want to minimize anything that people are currently experiencing. I think that's really important. So I was born in 1947. I had polio in 1949. As many of you know, the first real federal piece of legislation that was dealing with disability was in 1968. It was a small piece requiring that curb cuts that were being constructed with federal money would have to be accessible. And that was a guy named Hugh Gallagher, who had polio, who was working for senator from Alaska who got that in. But that was very small. The major pieces of legislation started in 1973 with the Rehabilitation Act, Title V, including 504, which many people know somewhat about, and then culminating, well, not culminating, but kind of completing part of the picture in relationship to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which did not include disabled people, in 1990 with the Americans with Disabilities Act. And then, of course, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act in 1975, and many other pieces of federal and state pieces of legislation. So I would say what was going on in that time period was, one, regular denial of education for disabled children, denial of college-age students either to go to school or to study in the fields that we were interested in because of the biases that existed, and in some cases still exist in certain professional areas, although the difference is now it's not legal, and in the past it wasn't illegal because there was silence.
Right.
One of the other very important aspects of what was going on, and I believe is one of the reasons why you're doing this event today, is the voices of disabled people coming together and beginning or continuing to work on advocating to encourage people with visible and invisible disabilities to come forward and not only to speak up and out about the barriers they're experiencing, but working more collaboratively, both with other disabled people from within the same category of disability that you have, but also working cross disability, and from my perspective, also intergenerationally. That is what we have continued to see really since disabled veterans came back in the 1940s. They really were some of the first groundbreaking organizations to start looking at issues around accessibility. And because of things like the GI Act, where soldiers were getting money to go to college, also was addressing issues at universities like the University of Illinois, University of Missouri, which in the 40s and 50s were really beginning to make their schools more accessible, including, ground transportation for people to get to classes. So if you look at disability studies and you look at how things have evolved, I think one of the great things is really a stronger and continuing to emerge cross-disability group, which really over the last number of decades has also included people who have psychosocial disabilities themselves, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities themselves, moving away from non-disabled people being our spokespersons to being allies and playing a role like is appropriate in any other movement.
Absolutely.
I mean, for me, it was, if you, read the book, you'll see things like the university that I went to. It was only one square block. And that was one of the reasons I looked at it. I didn't have to go across the street. The campus was really small, even though it was in Brooklyn. But there were 2 steps into the dorm. And there was a step into the bathroom in the dorm. And the bathrooms were not accessible. And when the student newspaper did a piece on the importance of the university becoming more accessible, this was the 60s, the head of the psychology department said that physically disabled students shouldn't be attending the school because it was psychologically traumatizing, as opposed to saying the university needs to remove these really ridiculous barriers that were easily removable.
Right.
So in those ways, you can see some important changes. I think, some of the more, I don't want to say dramatic, but over the decades, I would say dramatic. So like buses, I grew up in New York, in Brooklyn. None of the buses were accessible. The buses to get disabled kids like myself to school had hydraulic lifts, but none of the city buses were accessible, and the trains weren't accessible. So that really meant that our ability to travel around the city and go to school, go to theater, the movies, go out with friends, visit people, all those things were much more restricted. But starting also in the 60s and the 70s and moving forward, what we were learning was following the approaches that other civil rights groups had worked on. So looking at the 50s and 60s with the growth and evolution of the civil rights movement and the sit-ins that were happening, the marches that were happening, people in many cases literally risking their lives and losing their lives for equality. But also, we are seeing better rates, but not equivalent rates for disabled students graduating high school, entering and graduating colleges and universities, still not at the same level as non-disabled students, but improving. And I think much more attention being paid to the diversity, both by disability, race, sexual orientation, on and on in the area of disability.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much. So it seems like you were born to be an activist. You understood early on that the system was broken and needed to be fixed. You essentially made your career as an activist and advocate. Was there a moment when you realized that this was your life's calling?
I don't think there was a moment.
Many moments.
It was, I learned from my mother and my father about the importance of advocacy. My mother was the one more up front and center, but my father, he and his brother had a small butcher store. So he would go to work like 3:30 in the morning, come home at 7, 8 at night. But my mother was really the one who, on a day-to-day basis, was working on issues like getting me into school, working with other parents who had kids with disabilities, and getting the city of New York to finally make some high schools accessible so that students like myself would be able to go to high school, because previously students in wheelchairs went back on home instruction. So I really, I think, admired my mother for the work that she was doing, and little things that I would see, like in my special ed classes. They didn't want me to be going to that program, but that was the only one I could get into. Right. That, also provided transportation. But my mother became friends with the assistant principal. So I watched as she did different things, and how becoming friends with the assistant principal meant that he was looking at what was going on in the special ed classes in a way that hadn't happened before. And so I think, those examples for me really made me start thinking about the importance of networking. And my mother was on lots of different committees, and so I was, in many ways, I was following in her footsteps. But I think over time, a lot of the advocacy work that I was doing was really to benefit me, but it was very much also benefiting my friends.
Right.
So we were coming together. Mm-hmm. But it was something that and still today, in many ways, is benefiting me and others. So I feel that I do my best to be an example, including being collaborative, but also, things that happen where I try to speak up in order to address issues. And I think, I've been very fortunate because, when I was able to bring that lawsuit in New York City to become a teacher, having to advocate so much for me to be able to get a job and doing advocacy work outside of school. I taught for 3 years. I really enjoyed my teaching, but ultimately I needed to get a master's. It was a requirement in New York City to get a master's within 5 years. And when I left to study, I didn't go back, in part because I got involved with the Berkeley Center for Independent Living, and it was all about advocacy. So I was going to graduate school. I was on the board of CIL. Then I worked for a US senator for a year and a half in Washington, DC. And I've just always been driven towards systemic reform. And so, yeah, I think it's something that I really try to get to expand our circle. And basically to enable more and more of us to feel like we have to fight for what we believe is right. And that our experiences and what we try to do to rectify those problems and those areas of discrimination are also examples for others to do the same.
Definitely. Great, thank you. And so you have lived in DC for many years and worked in both the Clinton and Obama administrations. In retrospect, how would you describe the impact you've had throughout these years in those roles?
I'm not the right one to ask, but I'll tell you what I think. Because really impact is what other people feel. I think that I was able to bring good people together. So when I worked at the Department of Ed, at that point, we had about 400 staff, and I had a deputy and a commissioner for rehab and a director of the NIDER, the research component, and a director for special ed. And we were able to assemble a fantastic group of people, numbers of whom had disabilities, actually all but one. And that in and of itself was a real example, both to our staff and to the country and to the Department of Ed. One, that the Clinton administration really was investing in bringing disabled people into meaningful positions across government, not just in education, but Social Security and HHS and transportation, National Council on Disability, Social Security, many different places. And that, again, meant that we were pushing many things. One, a better understanding of what the issues were that disabled people were facing. How were our laws really being implemented? So special ed, as I said, is one of the areas that I had responsibility over. So I did a lot of traveling to schools and universities and meeting with many different groups and associations. And so, and parents and disabled, youth and college students. I think both I was probably the first disabled person they had met in a senior position like I held. And it also allowed people to have an opportunity to speak up and out about what was going on that was good and bad. And that really enabled me with my team and our staff to both work stronger internally, but also to work across, for example, the Department of Education. and really to get other offices in the Department of Ed to recognize that disability was something on all their plates and that we needed to be looking at what more could be done to ensure that disabled students were receiving what they needed in early childhood, primary, secondary, higher education, as an example. You know, one of the very important parts that I have tried to play is maybe in some ways, you know, being a trumpet blower and kind of continuing to ask the questions. You know, who are the people that are knowledgeable about disability? How can we address those issues? And really being able to do much more hands-on work across these institutions, including universities and the training that people are getting. You know, the number of people who, for example, graduate with a degree in international studies or development or whatever, who never learn anything about disability, then they come into these international institutions like USAID and the State Department, the World Bank, and nonprofit organizations around the world. And more is being said that you have to be integrating disability. But again, they're not learning about it in the most basic way at places where they should be. So I think, you know, the role of universities is so very important. And I think, you know, too frequently still at many universities, not just that they're not yet doing what they should be doing, but I think faculty sometimes and students sometimes are fearful of really speaking up. And I think that's really, you know, as we see diversity, equity, and inclusion moving forward, and where disability really is becoming more a part of the DEIA, as some places are calling it. But one of the reasons, you know, I don't shy away from the word accessibility because clearly it's very important, but I don't want people to think about disability as only accessibility.
Right.
And that's a very critical issue for me, because building a ramp, you've been supposedly doing that since 1973. So the fact that you're telling me in 2022 that I'm supposed to be excited that you're coming into compliance with the law, wrong.
Right.
Your disabled student services offices being appropriately staffed and identifying people, you should have been doing that for many decades. I'm happy it's being done. But what I want to be looking at is people are coming to universities to learn. And if they're not learning about how disability, race, gender, on and on, come together, whether they're in social work or chemistry or mathematics or English or whatever it may be, we're sending people out into the world who are not even slightly knowledgeable about issues that they will be, hopefully, because of work like you and others on the outside, putting pressure on these various institutions, you know, to make sure that when they're getting government money, when they're getting private money, that they are being inclusive. So there's a tension. And I think it's very exciting that more and more universities are looking at this issue in a meaningful way. But I think everybody would agree it's still not where it needs to be. But I think what was going on starting in the 40s is stopping and not just looking at something as a problem, but really looking at what are the solutions.
Right.
And recognizing that some solutions can be done immediately and some will take time, but also making sure that we don't allow time to become an excuse. And I think that's, you know, universities are a perfect example, as is transportation and healthcare and other things. We need to see many of these issues as being urgent, and they need to be treated as urgent issues.
Right. Yes, I absolutely agree. Thank you. And so I guess moving from the past to the future, what advice do you have for our students today? How can they work towards, as our mission statement asks, to become change agents in their own community and to serve and lead as advocates for a more compassionate, and global society?
Yeah, I mean, I think I believe it's very important for people to see themselves as agents of change. Now, you can be an agent of change and be verbally speaking out, and you can be an agent of change with your typewriter or however you feel most comfortable with. But I believe it's important for people to tell our stories. One of the reasons that I ultimately was able to work to write the book Being Human, and then the younger adult version, Unrolling Warriors, was because I was able to get someone, an agent and a publisher, and someone to work with me on writing the book. The way I wanted to write the book was to have as many stories in the book as possible. Not saying that my story is the most important story, whatever, but I wanted to, and I believe we are, evoking other people's thoughts about themselves. You know, what are your individual stories? I have found that in the last couple of years, as I've been, doing a lot of public speaking, that I learn almost every time I'm speaking something new, or I'm willing to say something and express something that I didn't necessarily feel comfortable doing before. And so being a change agent for me, it means that you're willing to take a little risk, and by that I mean putting yourself forward a little more and sharing things about yourself that other people may not know about, or that they do know about, but you haven't validated, and recognizing that that helps other people when you become a role model. I think role models are very important. And as I keep saying, the ability to come together, to work together on a college campus, it's a very unique time because you're together for a finite period of time. Your main purpose of being there is to study and learn, to be able to go out in the world, but studying and learning is more than the textbooks. It's getting involved in various clubs. It's working potentially on campus or in the community. It's really learning how to express yourself and your views, and to be doing and saying things that may be more difficult to do when you're older, but really experimenting with, who are you and how do you bring that forward? It's training yourself at the same time. And again, for me, what's always been important is doing things with as many people as possible. I mean, I have obviously my closer friends, my husband and others, but I have a pretty big net of people that I talk with, I respond to if they have questions. My answers aren't the right answers. My answers are my answers. And but I think getting disability to be spoken about more with both the positive things that are happening, but not shying away from what yet needs to happen. Being on colleges and university campuses gives you an opportunity to do things that you may not have the same opportunity in the future.
I think that's actually kind of a perfect transition, which is, we're going to continue the conversation today with a panel of people with lived experience of disability and also who work with folks with disabilities. And so if you could identify just one or two of the remaining barriers that people could kind of think about, what do you think are some of the most important things to focus on moving forward?
The continued growth and development of the disability rights movement, making sure that people understand the laws that exist and how to use them. Because in too many cases, laws like 504, IDEA, ADA, and others, people are not on top of what these laws are. They don't know what protections they have. They don't know who's considered to be a disabled person.
Right.
So I would think, growing our movement, making sure that we ourselves are as knowledgeable as possible, but also knowing other organizations in our community who are more knowledgeable than we are. That's always very important. So it's the growth and evolution. And I think it's the continued ability for people to speak up and out, like in the professions that you're studying and in the associations you'll join. The ability to really express both positive things that have happened, but also to hold people accountable about changes that need to happen. Those things, I think, are very empowering. Making sure that websites are accessible, that interpreters are being provided, that captioning is happening, looking at whether or not disability is being integrated into the coursework that you're learning on college campuses. Having, finding out, is there representation from the disability community on the president's committee that's dealing with DEI? When the reports are coming out, is disability being appropriately integrated? What's going on with recruitment to bring disabled students into college campuses, on and on. But I think it's really, and what's important to you. And at the end of the day, what is important to you as a person where disability is a part of who you are, what changes are important to you, and work on them.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So on behalf of all of us at Regis College, we are so grateful for you and your lifelong pursuit of justice and equity. You are absolutely my personal hero, but also an inspiration to our students. And we're so excited to have had you with us today.
Thank you so much for asking me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I found the faster route. I don't know. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nick Lanier. I'm the manager of Veteran Services here at Regis College, which may sound strange that I'd be moderating this panel. I'm also a disabled combat veteran. And so when we talk about issues of accessibility, especially here on campus, I'm more than proud to be a part of this. And to be a part of this incredible panel where we're going to be able to at least ask a couple of questions and understand that we're really starting the conversation here, that's kind of where we're at. You just had the opportunity to listen to Judy Heumann and her incredible story of her own perseverance and the things that she overcame and how that informs us today, specifically on our campus, and as we look around, as we think about Founders Day and we contemplate service for others to our neighbor without distinction. So it's in that spirit that I hope you'll take part of this conversation, listen, and if the panelists please introduce themselves, we'll start the questions.
Hi, everyone. I'm Courtney Mulligan. I'm the Director of Student Accessibility Services.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dariana Noyola. I'm a junior here. I'm a social work and criminal justice major.
Hi, I'm Michelle Cook. I'm a professor of nursing here at Regis.
My name is Jackie McDonald, and I am a professor in the Applied Behavior Analysis Department.
Thank you all very much. So as Judy discussed, disability advocacy it's much more than just an issue of accessibility, right? The definition has changed. It's obviously advanced, and it's become more inclusive. How do you understand this present-day definition of disability, and how is it relative to your own lived experience or your work experience or your research?
Sure. So just to start, I think many people are aware, but in 2008, the Americans with Disabilities Act was expanded to include even more individuals. And so along with that, socially, we've become more aware of disability, that people with psychiatric needs, people with dietary restrictions, chronic health issues can all be counted within the community of disability. The disability community is the only minority that you can become a part of any day of your life. And so we really need to start changing how we think about disability as just part of the human experience. And so in that vein, we're sort of here to share our ideas with you.
Dari?
Yeah, following what Courtney said, it is the only minority that you can join at any point of your life. And for me, that was when I was 8. And so their transition to that was really hectic. And I just remember having all of this happen to me, and I didn't even understand what's going on. And I feel like a lot of people go through that today and still don't have an advocate. And so it's really just important today to really look around and realize everybody is going through something, and you might not realize it, but a person like me can have disabilities, although it's not really noticeable. So yeah.
I am a mother of a child who has a learning disability, and I'm also very interested in how nurses with learning disabilities transition into practice, because that's rough for everybody. And so with the expansion of the law, we see more and more people who are differently abled, and lots of times you never know it. And so that needs to translate to the rest of the world, so that when people leave college in places that are aware of it and go out to work, the workplace really needs to get up to speed about the laws and how to deal with people who maybe aren't what they would traditionally think of as physically disabled.
And so I work in a field that works with neurodivergent populations, and I think with the access to law, more individuals were able to get services, be it speech and OT, ABA, but again, it's that hidden disability that I think people sometimes forget. Being neurodivergent, right, you don't necessarily see it, and sometimes individuals may mask their symptoms, which ultimately is not a great idea. So I think being aware that disabilities aren't always visible is an important aspect that I think we still need to do better with.
And Michelle, you said something interesting. I wanted to follow up with the second question, if I could, if you don't mind answering this to start. So given that you are the parent of someone, as well as you're in a field that's looking at this, and given the definition, I think we all have to tacitly recognize that the terms have changed, right? And that's radically important in this conversation. It's not what you may have thought it was in the past, but in fact, because we are a more just society, we recognize justice as necessary for all human beings, and we recognize this as a part of that. But in your experience, what do you see as, especially as you look to students today, and you had mentioned as they go out into the workforce, what are the present challenges? And what do you see as some of the future challenges that would grow from that as well? And anybody after Michelle, please feel free to answer also.
So I looked specifically at new nurses who are transitioning into practice, and there might be some nursing majors in the audience. Transition can be a little bit rough because there's an impetus for you to belong to part of a group. And that desire oftentimes causes people with disabilities to really sort of hide themselves and go out of their way to hide themselves as needing an accommodation or being differently abled. And the other thing was that when the people I had interviewed explained what it was like for them, they said that the workplace was not really knowledgeable about people with a disability that you can't see. The Office of Human Resources seemed to know the laws and what was necessary, but as soon as you moved out of that office to like a more, a nursing unit where there was managers and supervisors, they were a bit at a loss as to how to accommodate these folks.
Adding in onto that, I think that is a real challenge. Tolerance for people with disabilities, even if you can't see them. and really just understanding them and truly listening to them when they speak about their needs is truly something that I find challenging. It is something really basic, but a lot of people just truly cannot understand, especially when that disability is not really noticeable. Like myself, they don't really understand why I need the accommodations that I need, or why I can't lift heavy things, etc., etc. Because although I may look able-bodied, I am disabled, and people can become temporary disabled or just have a disability that they mask, and that is something that is not ideal or a person should not have to do. Buildings should have followed all ADA regulations, so have tap access to open doors for all doors in a building, or ramps. Having those options and elevators are really important for people with disabilities, especially not just for people in wheelchairs, but for people with lack of mobility or people who cannot lift heavy things, etc. So it is really important to look towards that tolerance and look towards the need of not just yourself, but others, and just people in general who cannot, you won't see their disability, but they do have issues.
And I think that's part of why we're doing this today. I think, we are part of your community, and we want you to know that we get it, and we are hoping to be a part of the change, and we hope that you will all work with us to share your own needs, but also to support those who have needs around you.
Did you want to add anything, Jackie? Are you good to go? Not trying to put you on the spot.
I think
I'm just
I'm
having
good.
fun.
I
You
wasn't
good?
supposed
Okay.
to answer number 2. I wasn't supposed to answer
Taking a break.
It's
number
not planned
3.
at all. No, not at all. No, because honestly, if we're being honest, these are difficult questions. If we're being very honest with one another as we look left to right, this is a hard conversation to have, and we should recognize that. And so, yeah, there are going to be some questions where we need to really have that conversation, and that's really where we went with this. So the third question we have, it's going to be a two-parter, and it's going to be a little bit longer, but we did this on purpose because I want you to hear the answers and think about how we start applying this stuff moving forward, right? It's great to have it in this moment in time. Life happens after this moment in time as well, so we're carrying it forward. So Judy is an incredible example, right? We were able to see this about being an agent of change, and Courtney asked that question, how can we become agents of change, and asked her that. So I'd really kind of bring that to you as a group, and especially as a community here at Regis College. And we've learned this today, right, through Founders Day, that there are core values that inform who we are as a community, right? That we do love and serve our dear neighbor without distinction, that we have care for all of God's creation. These animate who we are as a college community. And as that, how can we then become change agents for you on this campus and on our community? Just beyond hearing the really neat words and a good story, but how can we do that so that we as Regis can then move forward and make this positive change not only on our campus, but in our larger communities as well?
So one thing, I wanted to share a story. I was sitting in my office one day, alone. People were catching Pokemons around me, because that's a thing, right? There's even watches now. But anyway, and an undergraduate came in and spoke to me about an experience that they had had in an undergraduate classroom here at Regis. They had identified as neurodivergent and was talking about the experience of how they felt less than or not appreciated in the classroom. And I don't work with undergraduates, which you've never seen me, right? You're like, who is this person? But so I don't. And so I had been thinking about how I can do something, or how we at Regis can do something. And so Courtney and I had been talking a lot, and we recognized that I think at Regis we do a lot of great things. We do a lot of great things to help people academically, to help people, at the Dear Neighbor Fund, but we don't always have the resources for everyone. And so one thing that, Courtney and I are going to be starting to work on, which we will need your help with, you'll be receiving some emails from me soon, is to identify what you need to make you feel more involved at Regis, both as a community and how do you make friends if that's something that's hard for you? What do you do in between classes if that's something that's difficult for you? How do you, ask someone out if that's something difficult for you? So providing resources for those that may not have always learned those skills, because they are skills, they don't come naturally for everyone, to start providing that safe space for students to come and be part of a community that we should have already had at Regis. And we do have in some places, but not as well developed as we wanted. So we're going to start hosting some listening sessions for you to come and tell us, what we need to do to help you. Second tier, we want to start creating some resources for faculty here at Regis. Right, again, it's a skill on how to support students that may be neurodivergent in the classroom, and faculty may not have had those experiences in their professional development. So our goal is to develop some resources for faculty to help support you in the classroom, so you feel supported, you feel validated, and that you get the resources that you need. And then ultimately, our third tier would be develop resources for outside personal development and professional development for faculty and students, because we are Regis, right? But we're Regis in a community that doesn't have that right now. So that's one thing that we would like to do. And if you'd like to be a part of that, please reach out to Courtney or I, because it's a big endeavor, I'm not gonna lie. And we can't do it by ourselves.
And I think along those same lines this is not a conversation just for or just about people with disabilities or people who are neurodivergent. We are a community, and we need non-disabled folks alike to join our kind of crusade to be more inclusive, because it takes all of us, and we all want to be part of that change. So come one, come all. We're excited.
We all have things we need to learn.
That's right.
Yeah, the more the merrier, I also think, because able-bodied people as well can be a better advocate sometimes, because people with physical disabilities, noticeable disabilities, and disabilities in general can sometimes just feel tired for advocating for themselves within doctors or any other place. So honestly, the more the merrier, the better, the more advocates, the better.
Wow.
Yeah. I have one last thing.
Please go right ahead.
Sorry, I just thought of it right now. I think being friendly to people that may look alone, I think that's really important, right? So today at Founders Day, we saw people sitting together, we saw small groups, we saw large groups, but I still did see people alone, right? And as a community, it's your responsibility to pull those people in. So I think, right, that's something that you can look out for. Look out for the person that's sitting by themselves or that looks a little bit lost. Help them out. Be a friend. You don't know how that could change their life.
Courtney, for those who don't know, where is your office? Like, I know, we're straight. How many of you know where Courtney's office is?
I do. Some of you do.
Okay, yeah. Not that I can see anybody out here, but I'm assuming hands were raised, right?
So myself and Ludmilla, the assistant director, are located on the third floor of the Teagan Learning Commons, formerly known as the library. So we are right upstairs. We have our accommodated testing center, but our office space is also up there. And we are available 7 days a week, not really, sometimes, but we are there Monday through Friday, but also very accessible by email.
And do you know, is anyone on the panel doing research, especially as it comes, and we've talked about neurodivergency and we've talked about things like that, any research that's kind of speaking to that and moving forward as we look at autism in particular, and maybe some of the things we're advancing forward on campus? Or is it just going to be quiet when I ask that question?
Oh yeah, you're looking at me.
I kind of look at everybody. I find that to be easier. It's the bifocals.
Oh, okay.
I mean, people down there. So one thing that we are pushing towards is just getting a few parking spots near our accessible door. So that is just something that we are pushing towards, and as a community, we hope to have all of your backs and support with that. So that's just something that I would like to make known and hope that the community can help us. Yeah.
In terms of autism specifically, but obviously we're talking about kind of all abilities, that is the focus of my dissertation work. So social emotional supports in higher ed for students with disabilities, specifically neurodivergent and folks with an autism diagnosis. So I'm hoping to learn some things there that we can translate to the Regis community to better support our students. So we'll see. Wish me luck.
Absolutely.
The ABA department as a whole, not just me, but as the ABA department, we have a few studies that are ongoing looking at how you grow a more compassionate department to be more inclusive and more equitable for all people. And also some other stuff about advocacy work and how do you train someone to be their own advocate.
And do you find that that's, I mean, because we are talking about advocacy and being a change agent and wanting to do the right thing for someone else. And I think honestly, if we're to be honest one to another, that's something we all want to be able to do, right? We all like to think there's somebody on our side that in an event where we have lost some level of control, there's someone who's willing to stand the gap for us and go, wait a second, I've got that person's back. But I think, Jackie, you bring up a valid point. How do you learn how to be an advocate? How do you learn that skill, and then how do we together as a community develop that skill as well? Because again, we have great exemplars of that through Judy, through the work of Courtney's office, through the work that you're doing, through Dari, through Michelle. So we have these examples. How do you learn to do that? Is it just something that you kind of come upon, or is it better just to reach out and get to know people as people and learn how to interact one-on-one that way? What would your advice be when it comes to simply day-to-day advocacy for that person next to you?
I think that that's really an important skill that students should leave college with if they are somebody who has a disability. Because as you probably have known, K through 12 was a very protected environment. You went to college and it was a little bit more on you to get the resources that you needed. Well, when you get to the workplace, it's, you know, all bets are off at that point. And so knowing what the laws are and knowing how to present yourself and how to ask for accommodations in a manner, not that's begging, but that's informative of the people that you're working with, it's a really good skill to have, because in some instances, you'll be educating them on what you need and what disability is all about.
I think you said nice thing, that you need to practice. Right, it's not something that's just going to come upon you one day. You're going to wake up and you're like, I am the best advocate, right? There are specific skills that you need to practice in a safe space when it's not under fire, when you're advocating for yourself, but you're going to be practicing those things before you have to get to that spot. So when you do get into that hot spot, when you're advocating for workplace accommodations or, you know, any sort of things that you need outside of college, even in college, right, that you already know what you're going to do, what you're going to say, how you're going to react if they react negatively or positively, but it's about practice.
Right.
And I think recognizing where you need that support, it's easy to feel overwhelmed when you yourself are seeking some sort of additional accommodation. So reach out to the people like myself, like your peers who maybe are already connected with my office or who have some sort of support, and ask them the process. And for those of you who don't necessarily fall into the category of person with a disability, it's okay to take a step back, right? It's nice to support your friends, it's nice to speak up for them, but help empower people with disabilities to speak up for themselves. Because I think, as Judy mentioned, all civil rights movements are better served when those who identify with that identity are the lead voice. And so just be kind of aware of that. We absolutely need allies, but I think let the people with disabilities stand in their truth as well.
No, thank you. Thank you all very much. I'd like if we could give the panelists a hand, please, for everything they've done today. And so, as this all comes to a formalized ending, thank you so much for all you've done. It is my pleasure to introduce you the president of Regis College, Dr. Tony Hayes.
Good job. Good afternoon. What a phenomenal day we had. Thank you so much, Nick, as the moderator, and to the panelists for this profound and important conversation on disability activism and advocacy. It's important that we find ways to continue this conversation, both on our Regis campus and beyond. I am most grateful to Judy Heumann, a national and global activist who exemplifies the impact, influence, and change one person can make in this world. Thank you, Judy, for encouraging all of us to be change agents. So let's make sure Judy gets that thank you. My heart is full of gratitude to every one of you who participated today in Founders Day. Together, we've been servant leaders in Boston, in Metro West, on our own campus, and in our own communities across the country, thanks to our grad and online community. You can hear me, thank you. Doing what the Sisters of St. Joseph have done since the 1600s, meeting the needs of the times with love, compassion, and intentional action. Our service included those closest amongst us who are in need too. Our own hospitality center benefited from donations from the Walk for our community. Don't forget, John, you have to pay for that. And our Dear Neighbor Fund, benefiting from the generosity of donations from our graduate and online community. By the way, my husband is John, and he did walk the circle. I hope you found this year's Founders Day inspiring, because there's always more to be done, as we heard here today. Take to heart the message of service. Continue to look around and find opportunities to meet the needs of the times. Seek out that dear neighbor, the person next to you, and do the work our mission statement asks you to do. To serve and lead as advocates for a much more just and passionate global society. I want to take this opportunity to thank the members of the Founders Day Committee for their work to plan this marvelous day. I want to thank all who stepped up to the site leaders, to be site leaders, and all of you who participated in Founders Day made a difference for 83 nonprofits in Greater Boston and around the country. 83. 83. Amazing. Most especially, I want to thank Mary Lou Jackson and Terry Wallace for leading the charge. And let's not forget Katia Rigo, who was behind them both. And I'm so grateful for your incredible leadership and generosity, Mary Lou and Terry. I also want to take the opportunity to thank very, very sincerely our facilities staff and housekeeping staff, Aramark Food Service, and ITS for supporting this day. They were here 6:30, 7 o'clock this morning, making sure everything was in order for our day. Thank you all so very, very much. And by the way, on your way out, enjoy some ice cream and have a great rest of your day.